So what we're going to do here is we're going to spend a good amount of time on an in-depth demo of deployment modes. And in this demo, I'm going to deploy 2 Ignition servers, one for development and one for production. So I'm just going to have these 2 environments, a development environment and a production environment. And then what we're going to do is these servers are going to be blank. We're going to start from scratch. We're going to configure the 2 environments that we have in Ignition. So we're going to specify those deployment modes, one for development, one for production. We're going to then build configuration. We're going to connect to a database, connect to a PLC, and we're going to define the differences of those connections in each of the environments. We're going to then push all of this to a repository where then we can pull that into a production environment. We'll spin up a production environment, pull it down, and see that each of these environments have the same configuration, but are running the settings specific to those environments. So that's the idea here for the demo. So I'm going to go back over here. And what I've got already installed is my development server. It's already up and running. So I've got Ignition server on my local machine here. That is blank. I just have the install there. So what we're going to do is first go into the configuration area. And what we're going to notice is there's actually up here in the gateway overview, there's a mode, a gateway mode. And right now my gateway mode is set to NA. I don't have one specified. So what we can actually do is go over here to platform and we can go to modes. We can actually define the deployment modes or these environments right within Ignition's config. So I can say, let's go add development, and then let's also add a production environment. So I have these 2 modes now defined in Ignition. And what we could do is when we go and spin up an Ignition server, we can specify that server to run in one of those modes. So again, coming back over here, I want to get this to set to be development. I'm on my development server. And that's not configuration you define in the Ignition gateway itself. This is part of the ignition.conf configuration file in the installer. So I have this one installed on my Mac. So I go into the data directory here. I have the ignition.conf file, and that's where I'm going to specify this mode. So I'm going to open up my text editor, come in here, and you'll see that I have some additional parameters. So I know this is a little bit technical here, but this is where we can define additional parameter for the mode we want to run in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste one in here where I'm going to say this is a -d ignition.config.mode equals development. So I'm going to set this installation to be in the development mode. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and then we're going to go ahead and simply restart my Ignition server. So let's do that. We'll refresh here. When I get this gateway back up and running, we're then going to be able to see that this server is in the development mode. So let's go ahead and log in. And now you'll notice that the gateway mode is development. So it's going to choose all of the development specific configuration. Well, how do we define that configuration? Well, that is part of how the resources and system work. So if I go over here to connections, let's start with the database connection. So if I go and create a database connection, let's say that I'm going to connect to a MariaDB database. I'm on my development system right now, so I'm creating a new database connection. And when I do that, I have to think about, well, in my development environment, what is that going to be? In my production environment, what is that going to be? And so now I can actually, as developer, define all of that in the same gateway. So I can go connect to a MariaDB database. I'll call it DB. I'm going to specify the credentials. And for right now, I'm going to get the connect URL to my local machine, and it'll be to a database called Core. I don't have that one. But the reason I want to do that is I want to explain sort of how the hierarchy of resources works. What we're doing is you define configuration. There's a core set of configuration that we put into we call core. So I'm actually going to save this into a collection called core. And so that's going to define that database connection and core. And if I do nothing, if I don't do any overrides, that will be the exact same configuration for all my environments. And there are many types of configurations where it's going to be identical in the environments. There's no difference. But when we do start to have differences is where we want to have either specific resources for that environment or overrides of those resources. And I want to have an override because I want to have one database connection, but I want to be able to have it be different on my different systems. So what we're going to do is go over here now, and I'm going to create an override. I'm going to do that for my development system. And with that, I'm going to go edit this connection because it's not core, it is development. and go ahead and save that. And so now I'll have a valid connection. We're good to go. But if I do this show all, you can see in Ignition right now, I've got one database connection. If I show all, it's going to show that for that connection, though, I've got a core config and a development config. Of course, if I were to then go and create override for my production system, let's go ahead and do that. At this point now, I'm going to define the configuration for my production. So it's going to be to a production database. So now I've got the overrides there for my development and for my production environment, but it is just one database connection. And that's really important because as I develop these projects and as I use queries, or if I use the historian or alarm history or whatever it is, I'm using against that one connection. I just may want different databases on different systems. So that's how we can leverage the kind of resources and where you can define core and then define those overrides. So I've got a database connection set up here, and right now we are using the settings for the development server because my mode is set to development. So let's go over here to our devices. Let's create a device connection as well. This is the same kind of concept, and so I'm going to create on my development system. I'm going to create a simulator. So a device simulator. I'm going to simulate my PLC. I'm going to call it PLC, and I'm going to just simply run this at a 5-second rate. I'm not going to put the program here. I have a set of tags, a simulation that I'm going to use. So I'm going to define this in my core, and that is because for every environment I'm going to use simulator unless I specifically override that. I'm not going to create an override for dev. I don't need to do that. I just was showing you that there earlier because it is the same configuration in core as it is in dev. Of course, I do need to define the override though for my production environment. In my production environment, it's not a simulator PLC. It's an actual real Allen Bradley controller. And so this is also what's really cool is that these resources, they have different types. A database connection can be to MariaDB as one, could be to Postgres or to Microsoft SQL Server as there's different types, right? Drivers have different, or devices have different drivers we want to use. So I'm going to define an override for my production environment. Now, one thing that if I look at this collection now, I got the core and I got my production. The production is right now still a simulator. If I were to go edit this in the UI here, it's looking at editing the simulation. And I don't want that because I want it to be an Allen Bradley controller. So right now in Ignition 8.3, where it stands, we don't have in the web UI the ability to specify a different type here. But we certainly can do that in the configuration that's in the file system. So one of the great things about Ignition 8.3 is that all the configuration of Ignition is in the file system as JSON files. That means that we can do full version control, which we're going to show here today as well. And we can modify the configuration right there and have that be brought into Ignition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Finder, and I want to show you how this again with the deployment modes, how that hierarchy works, because we're using inheritance. The core configuration, the common configuration is there. And then each of my modes, I can provide overrides, but they inherit from all the common configuration with overrides or additional resources, very much like how projects work when you're developing applications. So we're doing that now with the whole gateway side configuration. So if I go over here to config, in my data directory, if I go to config, this is where I can see the resources. And in resources, I've got that core set of configuration. So in here, if I go to my OPC UA and go to device, you'll see there's my PLC. It is defined in that core set, right? Here's that config and the resource itself. And in that, the config is a programmable device simulator. If I look at that JSON. If I go down to my development, I'm not going to see, there's no overrides in the development. So if I look at this development mode, I don't see the OPC UA there because I didn't do an override there. However, if I do look at the production, I can see that there is an override in production for that PLC. And right now, of course, that is just using the same config. I need to change this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this into my editor. And instead of it being a simulator, I'm going to copy and paste. I saved an Allen Bradley controller before, and I looked at that JSON file. And I'm going to paste that in here. So now you can see that the type is a Logix driver, and I'm connecting to a PLC at 10/24/55. So it's a real PLC that we're going to work with. And so I'm going to save that file. So I've saved it on the file system, right? So it is there. So in the production system, it's going to be an Allen Bradley, where it is a simulator that is in the development side. So I have got that piece ready to go. So I don't need to do anything more here because in my development environment, I am running the simulator. It's not going to run the Allen Bradley until we get to our production environment, but I was able to define that. And this is where a staging environment can be important to kind of make sure that we're testing out, these kinds of changes before we actually deploy that to the production completely. All right, so let's go into our designer because I actually want to use that connect to that device and to that database. I'm going to create some tags that are in there. And before I do that, actually, I'm going to do one more thing, which is go back over here, services, historians. I'm going to add a SQL historian that is going to use, I'm going to call it historian. It's going to use that database. You'll notice there's just that one database connection. But again, each environment will have differences for what it's going to point to. And I'm going to store this in my core, meaning that all of my systems are going to have the historian with they're going to that database, but the database itself will have the overrides or the changes. So now let's go back into our designer. Let's create a new project. And we're going to use our kind of defaults for all of that. And we're going to create some tags. So in this PLC that I have, this control object PLC, I've got a bunch of tanks, and I've created a tank UDT object, and we're going to bring that in. And rather than building that from scratch here, I've already got the JSON with the UDT definition for my tank, and I've got all my tanks here defined. And so let's expand that, and you'll see here's my tank 100. Oh, I did a mistake, which is I forgot to actually on the connection on the programmable device simulator, I forgot to actually specify the program. So let's go ahead and do this simulation, simulate the simulation, which are all the tanks. I'm gonna go ahead and save that. And so now that's in there. These things should start working now with that simulation being in there. So there we go. Values are coming through. So that's good for me to know that in my development environment, I am using that simulation, right? Where I can see that. And I did make my simulation go to 5 seconds. So you can see that, for example, this temp PV is only changing every 5 seconds on there. All right, so I've got that ready to go. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use on my level PV and even my temp PV, we can go down here and specify the historian. I'm going to go to my historian connection. So I'm using that database. But again, here on my development side, it's storing to my local development database, whereas when I go to my production, it'll store to the real production. But the configuration that how we've defined it is the same. I'm not having to do weird hacks on these different environments for this to all work. Okay, so I've got my system, my development system up and running. It's good, it's ready to go. All that configuration's in the file system, and I want to get that into a repository. So I do have a GitHub repository, this Ignition server. It is empty right now, as you can see. I just have an empty repo. I want to get all of this configuration stored in there. So what we're going to do is go into my terminal here to start out. I'm in my install directory. I'm going to go into the data directory. So you can see there's data directory and all the resources, all the configurations in that data directory. What we're going to do is we're going to set this one to be a repository. So I'm just going to paste some commands here to initialize this repository. Let me shift over here and I'll add that repository to GitHub Desktop so we can kind of see this a little bit better. So here I've got all of these, all this is brand new, all these files that we have within this. Now, one thing that's important to note is that we do have to provide a get ignore file. And so we actually have a guide that is in our documentation system that shows how to put this, what a get ignore file should look like, and also how we can do initialize repository, all these kind of commands. So don't worry about this too much. I'm just going to get that file set up. So get ignore. And so that way, with this directory, it's not going to push everything. It's only going to push the things that we want it to push in there. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to call this my initial commit. Let me actually do this one more time because I might have done this out of sequence real quick. Sorry about that. Let me go in here. We're going to try that one more time. Add my local repository. All right, so there, I'm going to do that, my initial commit. And let me make sure. My git ignore is not there. One second. What did I do here? I put in the wrong directory there. My bad. Always kind of good to make sure we put in the right places. So let's do that one more time. There we go, 942 files. I didn't want everything to be there's a lot of files that are in that are temporary files we do not need to get pushed into the repository. So my apology there. Get the git ignore, get the proper one in there. We can again get all these resources pushed to that repository. Let's go ahead and commit that. My initial commit, we're going to push this to the repository. Once I have that pushed, then I'm going to see here, there's all the config. And again, if I were to go and look at the config, go to resources, right? I have the core configuration, my development, my production, overrides. I would see all of those in there. And I could see if I make changes to them over time, I would be able to see the changes that are tracking within that repository as well. Okay, but now what we want to do is we want to pull this into production environment. I want to spin up a brand new production environment and I want to use that configuration, but I want to make sure that environment is the mode is set to production. So we're going to do something, I'm going to do kind of simple here, just a couple of commands. I'm going to clone that repository. I'm going to do a git clone here, get that repository onto another folder on my machine. And so that's called Ignition Server. And so I've got this directory, if I get into it, Ignition Server, that has all of that information, all the config that we pulled from that repository. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to spin up a Docker container. Just to make this simple here, and I'm gonna mount that Ignition Server repo that I just pulled to the data directory within Ignition, and I'm gonna set the mode of this server to production. So again, just to kind of illustrate the whole point, this is going to be a production mode. So that mode in the gateway, you'll see it as production versus my development will be seen as development. And so that is part of that ignition.conf configuration. I'm setting that up in the Docker container here itself. Let's go ahead and start that. And so now this is a whole brand new server. It's on my same local machine, but it's an 8089. So I'm going to go there. And we should be able to see that this one is running in the production mode. So getting our second here to start up. There we go. So you can see that this gateway mode is production. So it's using all of the production configuration. How can we verify that? So let's go take a look at the connections. If I go to my database connections, I've got a valid database connection. Again, if I look at show all, you can see productions at the top. So that's a really important piece here is that on my production system, the production's being used. Let me go into incognito for the other one. If I go into my development system, again, if I look at the show all, development's at the top, right? So that it's picking that configuration there. If it was just core, which I'll show you in a minute, it'll just be core at the top if there's no overrides. So I'm able to see both of those. So let's go back into here. So that's my database. It's using the right one. I can also click edit over here and you'll see that it is host.docker.internal and the production database itself. If I go to my device, it's a little bit easier on the devices because the driver is right here in the list. So you can see that it is using Allen Bradley and that's connected and working on this system. Again, if I show all, you can see that production's at the top on this one. If I go look at the device on my development side and show all, you can see that core is the top because core is there's no overrides for that development, it's just using that. So again, a server will use all what's in the common or the core config and whatever overrides are specific to that environment, but all defined in that one set of configuration. That's what's really nice about this feature. Now let's go make sure, I'm gonna open the designer here for the new side for my production server. And make sure that our tags are still functioning exactly the same way. Because the OPC paths of these tags were identical. One was simulator, and the other, of course, is the real PLC, which you can see this is changing quite fast on the temperature. All that's being logged to a database on the production side, and it makes this process really easy. So as we keep developing, as we make more resources and more changes, we then can push that to repository, see all those changes, who's making what, see what resources are being affected, see the configuration for all the environments, and we can pull safely into each of those environments without having to worry about exporting only specific parts or uh, where we can prevent a lot of mistakes or having to, be careful about what the differences are in those environments. Now, one other thing to really note about this is it's not just the configuration itself on the gateway, connections and whatnot. It is also potentially logic that you have inside of the product. And this could be like a script that's running on the gateway. It could be potentially letting somebody know that we're on the appropriate server. So if I'm on my development side, if I go to perspective, let's go to my header. We may very much want to like have, let somebody know that we're in development. So if I take this text, I can actually bind this text to a tag. We provide a system tag. If I go to system gateway, there's the deployment mode. I provide this tag where I can basically have it specify, if we want to, what mode we are in. So if I'm looking at a project on, from an application, the browser, I would be able to see like this is development only. So like, that we know it's kind of, we know what environment we are in. We can use that in our projects as well, not just for display, but we can also use it for logic. If let's say that we had, if I go to this tag here, I'm going to copy the path. Let's say that we had a gateway. Let's go to a gateway event. Let's say that we had a timer script that was on the gateway. And we don't want that timer to run on the development side because maybe it's pointing to a REST API that there is no development environment for the REST API. It only is going to run in my production system. So what we could do is simply say if system.tag.read blocking, right? And I've put that path in there like this, and 0.value, if that is equal to production, if I can type, then I would run the code, right? That's in there. So we could actually leverage the knowing what mode we're in for more than just the configuration itself to really kind of define what we want to actually, for what we want it to do on each of these servers. We got to think about the entirety of the configuration in Ignition, that each of these environments, we're going to have those differences defined there. So that is what deployment modes is really there to make this process a lot easier, to make it, as we're developing it, to put that onus on the developers up front rather than trying to figure that out at a later time. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed that longer, more in-depth demo on deployment modes so how you can see all of this work. This is an incredible feature, and to wrap this up, here are some really important takeaways for this, which is instead of manually managing separate environments, you can automatically use the correct context-specific settings based on the gateway's mode. You can commit the entire configuration, including environment-specific settings, to a version control system for reliable application across multiple gateways. You can easily pull the configuration of each environment in a safe and reliable way. And of course, you can learn a lot more about deployment modes in the online user manual and at the Inductive University video library.